Chapter 1, Story 4, Go Down to the Cellar. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Wario Land 2. In the last part we started off the game, and now we've been flattened. Flat Wario is an awkward at times state for Wario to be in. When you're flattened like this, you move slowly left and right, but whenever you jump, you float down like a piece of paper. That means you can also theoretically float farther away than you could ever hope to jump in some cases. In fact, frequently that's the type of platforming you have to do with Flat Wario. But yeah, something about it's just never quite felt right to me. I think it is something about the way it bobs back and forth feels like just slightly awkward compared to its range. I don't know, it's one of those things that's hard to describe because control is only describable insofar in words without just getting your hands on it yourself. The Flat Wario state can be exited in one of two ways, either by being grabbed by one of those grab bats, or by being touched by water, be it a pool of water or water droplet. Notably, the weights there are the main way we're going to enter Flat Wario throughout the game, but there's a couple of other ways it can happen. By and large, every state has usually one or two ways you can enter it. Fire Wario is one of the few that only really has like the one enemy type they just constantly use throughout the game. And get used to these power-ups because, frankly, they use these same power-ups with a few new ones here and again throughout the rest of the series. Like, Flat Wario is also in Wario Land 4. And there's something about how consistent they are with them while also still giving them new things to do that I really like. Wario Land 4 especially does a lot with the transformations that get introduced here. That it's really neat. Speaking of Wario Land 4, because that was the first game in the series I played, let's talk about my experience with Wario Land 2. I did play this after Wario Land 1, and it was, I believe, another emulator first deal. But I've gone back to it every here and again, and my thoughts on this game, as we'll see throughout it, are complicated, because for everything I really like about this game, there's times where I just miss how Wario Land 1 was structured in this game's case. With that said, I do think 3 and 4 do better to distinctify themselves in a way that I enjoy going back to more than Wario Land 2. But again, I'll save my exacts on that for as we go, because this is a surprisingly long LP. So we got some time to discuss things. Now, something to note about a lot of Wario's states in the game is that while you lose like your shoulder charge or your ground pound during it, by and large, every transformation Wario has in the game can still say do the high jump. In fact, you need to get up here to access this stage's treasure room. So keep that in mind if you ever are having trouble with a specific jump. With that said, you may have noticed the music was shifting a moment ago. In fact, there it is, fighting back and forth for a second there. That's this game's goal door and its song. Whenever that's on screen, you're near the end of the level. The thing we saw last time where we had like the alarm clock, the faucet, the I guess cork, those are very atypical ways for levels to end. Usually it's just going to be the goal door. But every now and then the game likes to throw things at you to spice things up. Because largely, despite every level sharing a tile set within its world, almost every single level in this game has something pretty unique to how it's laid out in mechanics or general stage gimmicks. Which, for a game that has as many levels as this does, is honestly incredibly impressive. Also, like I mentioned last time, every future instance after part 1 of the minigames is being sped up for both time purposes, but also, with one real exception, they don't really change that much, so having them at full speed to me just feels like padding LP-wise in a way that doesn't really need to be there. Time for Story 5, Defeat the Giant Snake, the final level of Chapter 1. So, of course, to an extent, the game will get more complicated as we get through it, but the boss levels at the end of any given world, I think, are very emblematic of how the game's level designed on the whole, where there's generally, like, 3 varieties. There's levels that are very straightforward romps, to the point where if you actually just go through that door to the right, there'll be another door right after that, and that's where the boss of this world is. There's the labyrinth-like stages, but then there's the, I'm gonna call them weird stages, where the goal isn't tied to a direct, like, goal door or alarm clock-like entity. It's usually tied to more a vague goal, but we'll see those as we go. The big thing to note is that in any of the stages anyway, especially the more straightforward ones, you really want to try and find the few beaten paths you can travel along. Because not only are there going to be coins along there for your end of stage totals for like the number matching minigame, there's also going to be any coins you need to find the treasure room and use it, let alone actually finding the thing. In some cases, actually, what they'll do is they'll actually hide the treasure room, and the door will, the gold door will just be along the way to it. So the exit is actually the easier thing to find in those cases. So right there was a zombie enemy. Touching that thing's attack will actually trigger another state for Wario, but I'm not going to talk about that until we actually see it. I forget if we do in this particular visit to this stage, as it's a complicated one that has some really cool bits to it, but also I think is the one that's the most directly an obstacle compared to most of Wario's other transformations. With the treasure out of the way for this level, though, it's time for us to head on to the boss fight itself, that we do distract ourselves in the next room briefly to get some more coins. So in the meanwhile, let's talk about how bosses in this game tend to work. So obviously, Wario is functionally immortal in the game. The only thing you lose when you take a hit is coins. So you might be wondering, okay, so how do bosses work then? Well, generally, Wario can still get damaged by boss fights, but either he'll just get knocked back like he does when you take a hit, and that'll just maybe send you off a platform, or their main attack has the effect of ejecting you from the boss. For instance, the giant snake boss fight here, you just need to jump on its head like 4 or 5 times. Its main attack is to bite you and swallow you, putting you into an egg. That'll then eject you to the top of the room, in which case you'll have to go leave the boss room and come back through another method. Usually I think the block's just above where we were a moment ago, and start the boss fight over again. So you need to clear every boss fight without getting hit, effectively. Largely, despite that, the bosses are still pretty easy. There's only really 2 boss fights in the game I really think are actively difficult, and it's mostly because hitting them can be a problem on top of how easy it is for them to take you out of the arena. Welcome to Chapter 2, the SS Teacup. Story 1, Return the Hen to her nest. Worth noting, of course, like many games of the era, this game has a manual that tells its story and all that. And it has, like, descriptions for what each of the transformations does and all that. But I think my favorite part about it is that they actually have an entry about the hen we saw in that scene that we're chasing after in this level. In specific, my beloved pet. She wouldn't harm a flea, so be nice to her. Even Wario has at least one person they'll care for. So a moment ago, we may have noticed we heard a specific sound and saw a silver coin. Largely, coins only come in 2 varieties in this game. Small ones that are worth 1, large ones that are worth 10. Silver coins drop completely randomly. I'm not sure what the rates are of that. Future me, if you can find something about that, hey, please put that in. But they will only drop randomly from enemies or blocks you destroy, and they are worth a solid 100. Which, if you're trying to get a good stock up for the number matching game and all that, is your best friend. They're not absurdly rare, but they're rare enough where you're not likely to see one in every level. I usually average one every like 2 or 3, but that's just maybe my good luck. Now, I don't think I mentioned this last time, but that specific red enemy block there, this can only be destroyed by throwing enemies into them. Largely, any level of toss will work, but sometimes the distance will matter for that because an enemy's ability to break them does decrease the longer after they've been thrown. On top of that, if they're placed like above you at a weird angle or below you, they can be pretty awkward to break. Judging your distances is your best friend there, but it sometimes just doesn't exactly work out the best, especially when they place them several in a row. Because there's ways where, say, a full power throw may not even be enough to hit them in some cases. Spacing is a big thing for throwing, and it's probably one of the more awkward things to do in the game because of that. Because it's the rare moment in the game where it kind of consistently requires some amount of precision. Because I'm not going to say this game is easy, but this game isn't absurdly hard at the very least. but it doesn't require a lot of absurd precision. Usually you're allowed a lot of mess up and all that. In the cases of things like that, it can feel kind of weird, but thankfully, say you kill an enemy while trying to break an enemy block like that, and you needed them for something, if you usually leave an area through a door and come back in, the enemy will respawn. That was absurdly lucky. Kind of an important note, though. It doesn't come up in too many cases, but enemies will respawn upon entering a door, yes, with the only exception being any given level's treasure room door. I'm assuming it has something to do with the state that this room technically loads into a menu or something like that, but this will not count for respawning enemies in the case you need them for whatever reason. Mind you, most of the time the treasure rooms are located in such a place where you won't need to have enemies respawn afterwards, but there's at least 1 or 2 cases where you might need that, so keep that in mind. You might need to backtrack to another part of the room to go through a different door in the case you need an enemy in those cases. So there's our hen, and finding her is only half the challenge. We now need to take her all the way back to the nest at the start of the level. Thankfully, she is as indestructible as you are, but if you let her get too far off screen, she will respawn back here at the point where she was at. That actually applies to most enemies in the game. While you can move them all over the place from screen to screen, as long as you're not going through a door, if you leave them off screen for too long, they will respawn to their first location. My big thing I would recommend doing is going through this stage, getting all the treasure, and then backtracking through it to kill every enemy along the way. The enemy blocks aren't needed to be taken out, but it might help you in some cases. Thankfully, the hen is light enough where that she doesn't impact your movement at all, because there are some larger enemies. I think the danger duck is actually technically a case of this, where they're counted as a heavy enemy, where, for one thing, picking them up takes longer, but also you inherently move a little slower and jump lower while you're carrying them. On that note, something I should note about carrying enemies. There is a little bit of an awkwardness to it where you actually do require the physical space to lift them up. So say you're too close to a wall, you'll bounce backwards and you'll drop the enemy and all that jazz. And the same applies with ceilings that are low enough. So there's times where picking up an enemy is just you picking them up 16 times in a row, slowly bouncing them towards a place where you can actually pick them up. And that definitely feels awkward, to say the least. There's actually something about the panel pieces we're not going to get to see because of how I'm recording this LP and the order I'm doing things in. But I'll talk about that in a moment because it's time for us to enter Chapter 2, Story 2, Escape from the Woods. That I guess we're stuck in, despite it being right outside of Wario's castle. So, the thing about panel pieces. They're in stage order on the panel screen, left to right, top to bottom. So say I missed one in the previous stage and I got the one in this stage, it wouldn't take the previous one's slot, it would just fill in the next one after that. So in the case you're actually not sure where you missed a panel piece along the way, that's a good way to tell, but also there's a much more direct way to tell, we'll see, at about the halfway point in the game, for reasons we will talk about when we reach it. This game generally does a very good job of informing you what you missed out on, so it's never really a question of what you missed, it's more just where in the level you may have missed it. In the cases like the treasure and all that. Let alone maybe finding more coins to maybe get the panel the next time you play through the level. Also, the game really likes hiding a lot of stuff. It just barely off screen like this, so always hold various jump methods if you're curious if there's something there, because honestly, I'm not gonna say like 9 times out of 10, but at least like 60% of the time there's probably gonna be something just barely hidden off screen. Even if it's not like another platform for you to jump to, there's at least maybe like a bunch of like 6 coins there that can help you towards your next goal for whatever reason. So, the manual. Let's read its narrative. It's very small, but it's worth noting because it actually does inform us a little bit of what's going on, albeit it also kind of, I'm not going to say spoils things. Considering if you played the first game, you know exactly what's going on here, but One quiet morning, Wario was resting peacefully in bed. He was so tired from treasure hunting that he did not hear the suspicious intruders enter his castle. Who are these mysterious characters and why are they after Wario's treasure? We'll never know because now Wario is absolutely drunk. This is, I'd say, the only Wario state change that is just distinctively an obstacle. While you are drunk, Wario will move in movement bursts, and if you're not holding an input direction, he'll also move left and right randomly. You can press the charge button to burp out, which I think can kill enemies, but it's not exactly useful. It's funny, but because you can't do, say, ground pounds or stuff during it, it actively limits you more so than any of the other transformations in a way where it is meant to be the hazard. Which is an interesting way to do punishments in the case an enemy can be threatening without being an actual threat. Oh, that's a very minor thing I love about this game. This game's soundtrack in general is just really, like, catchy and goofy. I especially love all the power-up songs. They're very short loops because most of the power-ups in this game are either timed or go away after moving just enough with it. But they're all so incredibly silly, and I love them. Going back to the manual's narrative, though. Arrgh, I can't believe that Captain Syrup and the Black Sugar Gang have stolen my treasures. I am one angry Wario, and I'm going to get my treasures back if it's the last thing I do. So yeah, Captain Syrup's back, by the way. Wario Land 2 is much better than any of my previous games. Why, you ask? Because in this game, I am immortal, and there's no game over. With multiple endings, you can play my game many times. Isn't that great? Glad to see the fourth wall breaking has been a thing for Wario this early, because that's kind of just never really left him since, huh? Also, you saw me do it there. Very frequently, in the case I kill an enemy, I needed to break an enemy block, either for progress or getting the treasure. You'll see me do one of two things. Either jump cut back, or go enter the nearby door and immediately cut to be re-entering it, because you don't need to see that extra, like, 15 frames or something like that. So this is me speeding up because, again, drunk Wario is incredibly awkward to deal with. Well, I say drunk Wario, because he is, and it's meant to be. But because of protecting the kids and all that, technically speaking, the American manual lists it as Crazy Wario, gives it the bio. Watch out for those penguin-looking guys who throw balls at me. I get hit, I act really strange. They actually, like, have a bio for every single one of the states. For instance, Flat Wario, certain enemies can flatten me. I can't jump when I'm flat, but I can float. You have to find a way to get me back to my normal, beautiful self. On the other hand, Hot Wario, or Fire Wario, getting hit with fire actually really burned me up while I turn into a hot fireball. While I'm running around fire, I can destroy certain blocks. It's very directed with telling you what they do, but I appreciate them giving every state that, because some games won't tell you about some power-up states like that are pretty critical in their manuals, especially if they were under a certain length. So right now, I need to take one of these fire enemies and take it over here to break some fire blocks. But something to note, by and large, any enemy who's on the ground cannot survive in water. It's very similar to Kirby in that regard, actually. If it's an enemy in the water, they can survive in the water. But otherwise, if something falls in the water that you need to leave the room and re-enter it. Which, not that annoying at the end of the day, because most of the enemies you'll get on the way back anyway, but there's times where that might cause annoyance if it keeps happening over and over again. Because this game controls well. But the carrying of enemies is just awkward enough that it can cause problems consistently. Especially if you're playing certain levels over and over again to get the treasure in the case you're missing it in some form or another. Also, this was a thing in the last game as well, but worth noting that Wario's jump goes further and faster. If you do it in the middle of a shoulder charge, and especially if you're also holding the button when you jump. So if you're having trouble reaching certain platforms, doing a shoulder charge jump will go a long way for you in most cases. Not that there's many jumps in this game that feel absurdly precise. Again, this game is on the easier end of the spectrum, but there's enough jumps that are tricky that you'll notice them when you see them. But if you take good advantage of all the tools they give you, not a lot to worry about. I could have actually gotten to the gold door here just by dropping off the right from where the treasure room was, but I wanted the extra coins from those enemies and the 10 coins right there. Greed isn't good in real life, but when I see shinies in video games, I gotta pick them up, you know? But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're gonna go finish off chapter 2 before heading off into chapter 3. See you guys then.